Hey, greetings there, everybody. It is GleeCon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, we did our first little aside. We missed a day yesterday. We had some important things. It's that busy time of year for me and the fam, but it'll balance out. Don't you worry. We're gonna get there. But we had our first kind of aside episode. Like I said, we're kind of bouncing back and forth. And in that case, I'm going to try maybe and reflect on the lore separately from the side lore. So we'll see how I do in my recaps each time. But we looked at the establishing of the world tree in Chronicles, the new Night Elf home base. And they're not quite part of the Alliance yet. And we looked at the Dungeons & Dragons World of Warcraft setting, the 3rd edition, which is not World of Warcraft, just Warcraft setting. Important distinction. I think it's more of a Warcraft 1, 2, 3 kind of jazz. So what we are now going to do is start sprinkling in the novel. There is one novel which leads up to World of Warcraft. There is no World of Warcraft novel that takes place during Classic. So this is the only novel we'll be reading until we move on to the Burning Crusade, perhaps beyond. I haven't fully fleshed out what we'll be doing when we get to that point because we have tons of stuff to do here. So before we read this novel, play Classic though, this novel needs to be completed. It's around 24 or 25 chapters. So this is another one that is, one, it's hard to find. So we'll talk about where it falls in the publishing timeline in just a second once we start reading. But this is another one that is just, I couldn't find it in ebook form in any of the main ebook sites that I use. And once I dove deep enough, it was just as easily found free. Second, even if I wanted to buy it in book form, it's like anywhere from $50, $60 for a used paperback I saw ones as high as $600 for like a hardcover of this. So needless to say, it's a very rare. When I see that, I tend to think the scarcity factor is so small and people know it, and you just put something on there on eBay or Amazon, and like, put that book up for $600 and I'll probably never sell it. But if anyone ever is that much of a Warcraft collector, and this isn't like a first edition J.R.R. Tolkien or something like that. It's pulpy fantasy novels for the most part, especially in these early years. Even the new stuff coming out, as much as I like Christy Golden and Sylvanas, it's not exactly highbrow. And again, no discredit to them. I like it. It's nice comfort food, but it's not fine dining. Okay, so stay a while and listen as we begin this novel. It is called Cycle of Hatred. So I think this couple paragraphs here is going to be like an intro, but not an intro, something that will come up, like it's like a snapshot, and then we'll see it pages later. This is marked as 94 pages. I think these are condensed. I think in reality, the book is somewhere in the 200 range. It's not a huge novel, but it's a full-length novel. Let's look at this. As much as he loathed himself for being forced to do it, Byrock ran. It was a hard thing for him, and not just because the dagger that was still protruding from his thigh slowed his gait. To run from battle was shameful, but Byrock knew he had a higher duty to perform. The burning blade had returned, only this time they were humans. And all the attackers, not just the two he'd noticed before, wore that flaming sword image somewhere on them. A necklace, a tattoo, something. This was information that needed to get back to Thrall. So Byrock ran. Then he stumbled. His left leg refused to lift as it was supposed to, but his right leg continued to run. And so he crashed to the ground, high grass and dirt getting in his nose and mouth and eye. Must get up. You ain't going nowhere, monster. Byrock could hear the voice, hear the human's footfalls, and then feel the pressure when two of them sat on his back, immobilizing him. 'Cause here's the thing. Your time is over. Orcs don't belong in this world, and so we're gonna take you out of it. Got me? Byrock managed the effort of lifting his head so he could see two of the humans. He spat at them. The humans just laughed. Let's do it, boys. Galtak at a nosh. The other five all replied in kind. Galtak at a nosh. So this is what the premise I think is going to be of this book, is that the Burning Crusade is still on Azeroth, or back on Azeroth. I don't think it ever really left. But this time it's not the orcs that are the slaves. It's not the undead that are the slaves. Now it's the humans, and really every race is starting to be converted. So there's a more insidious spread, and the Burning Legion, which is really, if you look at the common thread behind Warcraft 1, 2, and 3, it's the Burning Legion. It's the demons that are behind all of it. So they really are the big villains, so to speak. So we need to tie them into Classic as well. What's the role? They don't just fade out. This book, Cycle of Hatred, is a World of Warcraft book. It's by Keith R.A. DeCandido. I don't think we've read anything by him, although we have looked at the Pocket Star books. And if you look, this is 2006. So this book is coming out right when World of Warcraft is coming out. I'm pretty sure. Maybe 2 years after it. I always forget that. Let's look. 2004. Yeah, I always forget if it's 2004. So this is when Burning Crusade is in the works, or is just coming out. So this makes sense that now we're going to go back and tie in, hey, even though Classic's been going on, Burning Crusade was up to some shenanigans before it even began, which makes it even more important when the Burning Crusade expansion is coming out. It also is interesting that while this is coming out, World of Warcraft, they weren't really popular enough to merit a novel until Burning Crusade. And then after a couple of years, like, man, this book is just blasting off in popularity. He thanks his family and all women and all the other women who taught me so much. So this is dedicated to the important women in this author's life. I'm going to skim through the acknowledgments. He thanks Chris Metzen, as many of the authors do. And probably because he was so instrumental in giving him some of the bones of the story, phone conversations and email exchanges were fruitful. He also thanks Marco Palmieri, which is his editor, and that guy's boss, Scott Shannon, who said, hey, good idea, man. Let's write a book about this. It's making a lot of money. And his agent, Tertiary, thanks to, here we go, he's thanking the other novelists, because this isn't the first novel written in the series, but this is, I believe, the first novel that's really a World of Warcraft novel. There are a couple other books that came out before this, like Last Guardian and Tides of Darkness, but they were really not dealing with World of Warcraft. But by this point in time, we've read many books by Richard A. Knack, Jeff Grubb, I think some, and Christy Golden. She's the OG, the heavy hitter. And in particular, The Last Guardian and Lord of the Clans were very helpful with the characterizations of Egwin and Thrall. Okay, so cool. So that's nice to know that he's giving credit where credit is due here. I don't know who the Malibu Gang, the elitist bastards, novel scribes, inkwells, and mailing lists that kept his sanity by making him insane. Maybe he's getting, I have no idea. Some acronyms: Palombo, Kyoshi Paul, and people at the dojo. Okay, he's probably into martial arts. And those that live with him, both human and feline. So he's a cat guy. All right, so that's a snapshot into this author's head. And a historian's note, very important when you're reading fiction. This takes place 1 year prior to World of Warcraft. They're very important to people like us and to people like our ex-Cariat guy, who we really pull a lot of the stuff out of, and it helps us not miss anything, because that guy is thorough, or girl is thorough, whoever they are, they're thorough. It's 3 years after the invasion by the Burning Legion and their defeat by the combined forces of orcs, humans, and elves. So Warcraft the Reign of Chaos, and the Frozen Throne. So it's 3 years after the Frozen Throne-ish, and it is 1 year prior. So there's a 4 year gap between Warcraft 3, But not really. I mean, a lot of those years are taken up by the events of Reign of Chaos and the Frozen Throne. So this is in that tiny little interstitial period, and this is really, other than some of the things we're going to read in Chronicles and, like I said, a couple comics, this is the only thing going on. It's the only show in town. All right, let's begin chapter 1. That was a lot of kind of building up. So sorry about that. About a quarter of our episode is me talking. Chapter 1, here we go. Eric had been cleaning ale off the demon's skull mounted behind the bar when the stranger walked in. The Demon's Bane Inn and Tavern didn't usually get much by way of tourists. Rare was the day when Eric didn't know the face of one of his patrons. More common was when he didn't know their names. He only remembered their faces due to repeated exposure. Eric didn't much care who came into his tavern, as long as they had coin and a thirst. Sitting down at a table, the stranger seemed to be either waiting for something or looking for something. He wasn't looking at the dark wooden walls, though you could barely see them, seeing as how the Demon's Bane had no windows and illumination only from a couple of torches, or at the small round wooden tables and stools that festooned the floor. Eric never bothered to arrange the tables in any particular pattern, since folks would just go and move them around to suit themselves anyhow. After a minute, the stranger got up and walked up to the wooden bar. "I'm trying to get some table service." "Though I have none," Eric said. He never saw the sense in paying good money for waiters. If folks wanted a drink, they could walk up to the bar. If they were too drunk to walk up to the bar, he didn't want them to drink any more anyhow, since folks who were that drunk were like to start fights. Eric ran a quiet tavern. The stranger plunked a silver piece on the bar and asked, "What's the most expensive drink you have there?" "That'd be bull's grog from the north. Orcs make it, ferment it in." The stranger's nose wrinkled. No orc drink." Eric shrugged. People had weird considerations when it came to alcohol. He'd seen folks argue about the relative merits of beer versus corn whiskey with more intensity than they brought to political or religious disagreements. If this gentleman didn't like orc drinks, that wasn't Eric's lookout. "Got corn whiskey, made fresh batch last month." "Sold." The stranger smacked his hand on the wooden bar, disturbing some of the nutshells, berry seeds, and other detritus that had gathered there. Eric only cleaned the bar about once a year or so. Unlike the demon's skull, no one could really see the bar, and he never saw the need to clean a surface that wasn't visible. One of the regulars, a soldier who always drank the grog, turned to look at the stranger. "Mind telling me what you got against all booze?" The stranger shrugged while Eric pulled the glass bottle of corn whiskey off the shelf and poured some of its contents into a mug that was mostly clean. "I've nothing against orc drink, good sir. It's orcs themselves I've issue with." The stranger held out a hand. "My name is Morgoz. I'm a fisherman by trade. I have to say I'm not well pleased with how my nets have filled up this season." Not bothering to shake the hand or introduce himself, the soldier said, "All that tells me is you ain't no good as a fisherman." Lowering his gaze upon realizing that the soldier wasn't feeling friendly, Margos took his corn whiskey instead. "I'm a fine fisherman, sir. I thrived in Kultiras before circumstances forced me to move here." On the other side of Margos sat a merchant who sputtered into his ale. "Circumstances? Right. Got conscripted to fight the Burning Legion, did you?" Margos nodded. "As I'm sure many were. Tried to make a new life for myself here in Theramore. How can I with the damn greenskins taking all the good fishing waters for themselves?" Eric found himself nodding in agreement with the first half of Margot's statement, if not the second. He himself had come to Theramore after the Burning Legion was driven off, not to fight, as the fighting was over by the time he made the journey, but to claim his inheritance. Eric's brother Olaf had fought against the Legion and died, leaving Eric enough coin to build the tavern Olaf had dreamed of opening after he finished his service. In addition to the money, Eric was bequeathed the skull of a demon that Olaf had slain in combat. Eric had never particularly wanted to run a tavern, but he'd never particularly wanted to do anything else, so he opened the Demon's Bane in honor of his brother. He figured, rightly, that the community of humans in Theramore would gravitate toward a place with a name that symbolized the driving off of demons that led to the city-state's formation. "I'm standing for this," the soldier said. "You fought in the war, fishermen. You know what the orcs did for us." What they did for us is not what distresses me, good sir, Margot said, but rather what they're doing to us now. They get the best of everything. This was the boat captain at one of the tables behind the soldier. Up Ratchet way. Them goblins always favour Orc for repairs of dock space. Last month I had to wait half a day before they let me dock my skiff. Some Orc boat came by 2 hours after me and got a spot right off. Turning to face the captain, the soldier said, "And go somewhere other than Ratchet." "'Tain't always an option," the captain said with a sneer. So we're talking about locations that exist within World of Warcraft, but we seem to be taking place, I don't know where we're at, if we were before that final act in Warcraft 3 or not, so this could still be some pre-stuff. "It's not like they always need the repairing neither," said the man with the captain. Eric thought it might have been his first mate since they dressed similarly. Said, "They got oaks up in mountains above Orgrimmar. Been making their ships from them. What we got? Weak spruce is all. They hoard 'em, they do, keeping all the good wood. Our boats will be leaking all over thanks to the marshy garbage we got to work with." Several other voices muttered in agreement with the sentiment. "So you'd all like it better if the orcs weren't around?" The soldier slammed his fist on the bar. "Without them we'd be demon food, and that's a fact." "I don't think anyone's denying that." Margot sipped from his whiskey mug. "Still, there does seem to be an unequal distribution of resources." "Orcs used to be slaves, you know." This was someone else at the bar whom Eric couldn't see from where he was standing. "To humans and to the Burning Legion, if you think about it. Can't blame them for wanting to take everything they can now." "I can if they're taking it away from us," the captain said. The merchant nodded. "You know, they're not from here. They came from some other world, and the Burning Legion brought them here." The first mate muttered, "Maybe they ought to go back where they came." "Makes you wonder what Lady Proudmoore was thinking," Margot said. Eric frowned. At those words, the tavern suddenly got rather quiet. Lots of people had been muttering assent or disagreement either with the sentiments expressed or the people expressing them, but as soon as Margot's mentioned Janet Proudmoore, worse, mentioned her in a disparaging manner, the place got quiet. Too quiet. In the 3 years Eric had been a tavern owner, he learned that there were 2 times when you expected a fight to break out: when the place got too loud and when it got too quiet, and the latter times usually brought on the really nasty fights. Another soldier stood up next to the first one. This one was wider in the shoulders, and he didn't talk much, but when he did, it was in a booming voice that made the demon skull behind the bar rattle on its mouth. "Don't nobody talk bad about Lady Proudmoore, unless he wants to be living without teeth." Swallowing audibly, Margot's quickly said, "I would never dream. Speaking of our leader in anything but reverent tones, good sir. I promise." He gulped down more of the corn whiskey than it was advisable to drink in one sip, which caused his eyes to greatly widen. He shook his head a few times. "Lady Proudmoore's been very good to us," the merchant said. "After we drove back the Burning Legion, she made us into a community. Your complaints are fair, Margot's, but none of it can be laid at the lady's feet. I met a few wizards in my day, most of them aren't fit to be scrapings off my sandals, but the lady's a good one, and you'll find no support for disparagement to her." "It was never my intent to disparage, good sir," Margot said, still sounding a bit shaky from his ill-advised gulp of corn whiskey. "But one must wonder why no trade agreements have been made to obtain their superior wood, and that these fine gentlemen you've mentioned." He looked thoughtful for a second. "Perhaps she has tried, but the orcs would not permit it." The captain swallowed a gulp of his ale, then said, "Perhaps them orcs told her to leave Northwatch." "We should leave Northwatch," the merchant said. "The Barrens are neutral territory. That was agreed to from the beginning." The soldier stiffened. "You're crazy if you think we're giving that up," Margot said. "That is where the orcs fought Admiral Proudmoore." "Yes, an embarrassment. As a fine a leader as Lady Proudmoore is, that's how much of an idiot her father was." The merchant shook his head. The entire sordid incident should be put out of our heads, but won't be as long as, the captain interrupted. If you ask me, we need to expand beyond North Watch. Sounding annoyed, though whether at the interruption or the sentiment, Eric neither knew nor cared, the merchant said, Are you mad? Are you? The orcs are squeezing us out. They're all over the blessed continent and we've got Theramore. It's been 3 years since the Burning Legion was sent off. Oh, this is the ship captain, sorry. Don't we deserve better than to be lower class in our own land? To be confined to one cesspool of a city-state? Theramore is as fine a city as you'll see in human lands. The soldier spoke the words with a defensive pride, only to continue in a more resigned tone. But it is true that the orcs have greater territory. That's why Northwatch is essential. It allows us to maintain a defense beyond the walls of Theramore. Besides, the first mate said with a laugh into his ale mug, the orcs don't like us there. That's reason enough to keep it if you ask me. Nobody asked you, the merchant said snidely. The other man at the bar, Eric had wandered down bar a bit and now saw that it was that bookkeeper who worked the docks, said, Maybe someone should. Yorks act as if they own Kalimdor, and we're just visiting. But this is our home too, and it's time we acted like it. Orcs aren't humans, not even from this world. What right do they have to dictate how we live our lives? They have the right to live their lives, don't they? The merchant asked. Nodding, the soldier said, I'd say they earned that when they fought the Burning Legion. What for them? He gulped down the remainder of his wine, then slid the mug toward Eric. Give me an ale. Eric hesitated. He had already started reaching for the grog bottle. This soldier had been coming into the Demon's Bane ever since Eric opened the place, and he'd never drunk anything save grog. But that 3-year-long patronage had earned him the right not to be questioned. Besides, as long as he was paying, he could drink soapy water for all Eric cared. Fact is, the captain said, this is our world by right of birth. Them orcs are just guests in our own. It's our time to start acting like it. The conversation went on from there. Eric served a few more drinks, tossed a few mugs into the basin to be cleaned later, and only after he gave the merchant another ale did he realize that Margot's, who had started the whole conversation, had left. He hadn't even left a tip. Eric shook his head in disgust, the fisherman's name already falling out of his head. But he'd remember the face. He'd probably spit in the bastard's drink next time he came in, having only one drink and then starting trouble. Eric hated troublemakers like that in his place, just hated it. More people started complaining about the orcs. One person, the bruiser next to the soldier, slammed his ale mug on the bar so hard that it spattered his drink on the demon's skull. Sighing, Eric grabbed a rag and wiped it off. There was a time when Margot's would have been too scared to walk the darkened streets of Theramore alone. True, crime was not a major concern in so closed a community as Theramore. Everyone knew most everyone else, and if they didn't, they knew someone else who did, so criminal acts were rare enough. Those that were committed were generally punished quickly and brutally by Lady Proudmoore's soldiers. Still, Margot's had always been small and weak, and the big and strong tended to prey on the small and weak. So Margot's generally avoided walking around alone at night. You never knew what big and strong person was lurking to show how big and strong he was by beating up on a lesser target. Many times Margot's had been that target. He soon learned that it was best to do what they said and make them happy in order to avoid the violence. But Margot's no longer had that fear, or any other kind of fear. Now he had a patron. True, Margot's had to do his bidding also, but this time the reward was power and wealth. In the old days, the reward was not being beaten within an inch of his life. Maybe he was exchanging one type of gut-crippling fear for another, but Margot's thought this was working out better for him. A salty breeze wafted through the air, blowing in off the port. Margot's inhaled deeply, the scent of the water invigorating him. He spoke at least partly true in the Demon's Bane. He was a fisherman, though never a particularly successful one. However, he did not fight against the Burning Legion as he claimed, but instead came here after they'd been driven back. He'd hoped to have more opportunities here than he'd had at Kultiras. It wasn't his fault that the nets were substandard. They were all he could afford, but tell the dock authority that and see where it got you. Where it got him mostly was beaten up. So he came to Kalimdor, following the rush of people hoping to provide services for the humans who lived there under Lady Proudmoore, but Margot's hadn't been the only fisherman to ply his trade, nor was he anywhere near the best. Before his patron arrived, Margot's was close to destitute. He wasn't even catching enough to feed himself, much less sell, and he was seriously considering just grabbing his boat's anchor and jumping off the side with it, put himself out of his misery. But then his patron arrived, and everything got better. Margot soon arrived at his modest apartment. His patron hadn't let him move to better accommodations despite his pleading. The patron called it whining and unseemly, regarding the lack of good ventilation, the poor furnishings, and the rats, but his patron assured him that such a sudden change in his status would draw attention, and for now he was to remain unnoticed. Until tonight, when he was instructed to go to the Demon's Bane and start sowing anti-orc sentiments. In the old days, he never would have dared to set foot in such a place. The types of people who liked to beat him up usually congregated in large groups in taverns, and he preferred to avoid them for that reason, or rather used to prefer to avoid them. He entered his room. A pallet that was no thinner than a slice of bread, a burlap sheet that itched so much he only used it when the winter got particularly cold, and even then it was a difficult choice, a lantern, and precious little else. A rat scurried across into one of the many cracks in the wall. Sighing, he knew what needed to be done next. Besides the inability to move to better quarters, the thing Margot's hated most about his dealings with his patron was the odor he carried with him afterwards. Some kind of side effect of the magic at his patron's command, but whatever the reason, it annoyed Margot's. Still, it was worth it for the power, and the ability to walk the streets and drink in the Demon's Bane without fear of physical reprisal. Shoving his hand past his collar to reach under his shirt, Margot's pulled out the necklace with the silver pendant shaped like a sword of fire. Clutching the sword so tightly that he felt the edges dig into his palm, he spoke the words whose meaning he'd never learned, but which filled him with an unspeakable dread every time he said them. Galtak Erednosh, Erednosh Bangala, Erednosh Havik Yirtog, Galtak Erednosh. The stink of sulfur started to permeate the small room. This was the part Margot's hated. Galtak Erednosh, you have done as I commanded. Yes, sir. Margot's was embarrassed to realize that his voice was getting squeaky. Clearing his throat, he tried to deepen his tone. I did as you asked. As soon as I mentioned difficulties with the orcs, virtually the entire tavern joined in. Virtually. Margot's didn't like the threat implied in that one-word question. One man was a hold-up, but the others were ganging up on him to a certain degree, provided a focus for their ire, really. Perhaps you have done well. That came as a huge relief. Thank you, sir, thank you. I'm glad to have been of service. He hesitated. If I may, sir, might now be a good time to once again broach the subject of improved accommodations. You might have noticed the rat, but you have served us. You will be rewarded. So you said, sir, but I was hoping a reward would come soon. He decided to take advantage of his lifelong fears. I was in grave danger this evening, walking alone near the docks can be... You will come to no harm as long as you serve. You need never walk with fear again, Margot's. Of course, you simply wish to live the life you have never been permitted to live. That is an understandable concern. Be patient, Margot's. Your reward will come in due time. The sulfur stench started to abate. Thank you, sir. Galtak Erednosh. Dimly the patron's voice said, Galtak Erednosh. Then all was quiet in Margot's apartment once again. A bang came on the wall, followed by the muffled voice of his neighbor. Stop yelling in there! We're trying to sleep! Once such importunings would have had Margot's cowering in fear. Today he simply ignored them, lay down on his pallet, hoping the smell wouldn't keep him from sleeping. Okay, so we have this person. They're obviously burning Legion, so we're showing that. We're showing that someone, most likely demons, but it could be some old ones, are probably demons. They are working to sow discord between the orcs and the humans, and they're going to be largely successful. We just know that happens. And because right now, as you can see, there is still a pretty fair alliance. That's one thing that we had to question at the end of Warcraft 3 is how do we go full on from Thrall and Jaina being allies, and they're the leaders of their respective factions to full-on World of Warcraft. Um, and the seeds of that were the battle that happened between the Horde and the Kultiras forces, the Admiral. Um, the Jaina stepped back, ship stained, but as you can see, the people, so many people fought in that war, and they don't forget as easily. So if you play on those fears, and here's one more reason why you have people that are pulling the strings, which has been going on since the beginning of time in Warcraft. Someone's always, whether it's Deathwing or someone else, or the Lich King, there's always somebody behind pulling these strings and creating discord. Um, yeah, and we've set our time. Again, I'm not sure. It seems like this is happening right after Warcraft 3 has wrapped up. Okay, either way, you know that I appreciate you so much. I thank you so much for watching and listening. I look forward to seeing you all next time on Lore of Warcraft. This episode, in the pipe, 5x5.